What's going on, Omnibuddies? Mitch here, and today we are not doing an overview. We are not doing an unboxing. We got a challenge to do. All right, so we got challenged. My channel got challenged by the Brave and the Boys YouTube channel. Great channel. Definitely check them out. Hopefully I'll remember to put a link to them in the description, but the Brave and the Boys on YouTube, they do some really good stuff. Check them out. Anyways, there's been a challenge that has been started up, and it's now been passed on to me. So it's the new challenge, which is kind of not your absolute, as far as I understand it, and what I'm going to do is not my absolute top 5 books of all time. So not my favorite omnis, favorite hardcovers, favorite stories. These aren't going to be, well, actually they kind of are my favorite stories, but in a way, a lot of them are in like my top 10, top 20 books, but they're not my absolute, some of them are, but are not my absolute top favorite recommendations books, but these are my most influential books. And what I mean by that is they are books that had a big influence on my comic book reading, comic book collecting, my kind of mindset in how in this whole hobby for me. And so yeah, so I have my top 5 most influential comic book, graphic novels, omnis. Some of these are not omnis, some of them are just hardcovers, so I'll just say top 5 comic books, most influential comic books. So we are going to kick this off with number 5. Number 5 is, and this is actually one of my, I'd say at least top 5, but probably top 3, consistently top 3. Could be depending on the feel. I don't know about you, but I never have like, this is my top book of all time. It kind of wavers just depending on the flavor of the week for me, on how I'm feeling. But we have the absolute crazy man, Terry Moore. That dude has created the Terry Moore-verse, and his stuff has all kind of threaded together, which is super cool. He wrote all these separate stories: Strangers in Paradise, Echo, Serial, Rachel Rising, Motor Girl, and then he had all these kind of separate stories, and then he brought them all together into what is it, 25 years later or something like that, and then Serial now, where they've all kind of brought together and become part of the same universe. They had kind of like some overlap, some characters that would cross back and forth, but it was never necessary to know any of them or know any of the backstories. They just would kind of appear. And so my first one is Rachel Rising by Terry Moore. So this is book number 5. I read this pretty early on in my collecting career. And I was, I started like a lot of people with like, a lot of comics I was reading was Marvel, Avengers, X-Men, that kind of stuff. But Walking Dead was one of my big ones. And so I decided, you know what, I don't know. I got back into color comics and all that. And then I grabbed this. And this is all black and white. Thick, stark black and white. Let me show you that. I have no idea what page I just opened up to. But this book is just friggin' phenomenal in that it brought about what horror comics and suspense and thriller comics really could be. And this is a book, if you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you know that I've talked about. I absolutely love it. I have an overview of it too. This is the limited collector's edition, signed and numbered here. So I have 49 out of 750, and the regular omnibus hardcover looks like that instead of just all black. And then there's a soft cover trade paperback, which is like a red version. But this story is so cool. It's got like kind of the occult, witchcraft kind of Salem stuff going on, mixed with some horror and suspense and some really interesting family stuff and cool relationships that are really like kind of deep and they get explored. It's a lot of fun. definitely recommend you check that out. It really turned me on to, you know what? I need to learn to read other genres besides the whole like capes and cowls thing. And that was kind of my first foray. So that's why that is one of my absolute most influential books, other than it being friggin' awesome, is that it got me to explore other genres outside of the big two Marvel DC kind of stuff. The next thing that really has affected me a long time. This is in a slipcase. I'm just going to talk about one of the books, but this is the Carbon and Silicon and Shangri-La double slipcase set. So Carbon and Silicon is such, and this is by Matthew Bablett, and this, and also I gotta say, Magnetic Press, who I do caveat work with and do some contract work for, but this was long before I ever started working with them. I fell in love with the work that they were doing, bringing over these like European comics that were award-winning over in Europe, and then bringing them to English and putting them in some of the absolute most gorgeous, look at this foil, linen foil. Well, it's kind of a faux linen, but it's got that really nice texture to it. And then all that foil on there. I just got the Monkey King hardcover slipcase set, which is very similar in that foil treatment with the linen slipcase. But Carbon and Silicon, y'all, like, it showed me like that comics could really touch on so much more than just like superheroes or generic stories, but they could really push the envelope of philosophy and thought on, and to get you to think about what at a much deeper way of like human life. And Carbon and Silicon touches on what makes, a human, what makes our, what gives us a soul. And so this is like AI, and AI slowly becoming more human, which is very, very topical right now. It's only gotten more topical. So Bablett really hit on some insanely good, close to home, very topical things right with this. But, as humans, we want to elongate our lives and become, smarter, stronger, just longer living, all that kind of stuff. We use technology to expand our lives and make us better than what we are born as. And then AI using technology and kind of going the opposite direction and almost becoming more human in some ways, at least in this, going far, far into the future. It jumps hundreds of years, keeps going. And, eventually it's like, who's really the humans here? Is it the AI, or that started as AI and now they're more human and more flesh than we are? Or are we, because we started flesh, more human than the AI? So it's got some really great stuff. And like I said, the packaging, the treatment, hardcover treatment, the publishing on it is just next to none. And that story and that art, oh man, like I love the story, and the art is just insanely good. So gorgeous. But yeah, so that is my book number 4. And that definitely turned me on to how books can really dive deep into philosophical issues. So number three, we have the book that really hit me at the right time. 2018 was a very hard year for my family. We had multiple losses. My sister, grandmother, mother-in-law, aunt, all passed away in 2018. It was a rough year, and a lot of it was from cancer, some other things, but I won't go too much into that. But that year, I lost a lot of people in our lives. So it was really hard for me. And I was kind of coming out of that whole thing, and I read this book that deals with a lot of loss and deals with family and how you cope. And that book was Joe Kelly's I Kill Giant. And this, sadly, is super out of print. But I know there's the movie, which I haven't really been able to bring myself to watch yet. I should. But man, I just loved this story so much. The Titan edition. I know that there's like a trade paperback, but again, black and white. I don't know what it is. A lot of black and white for me. I think it's because the art's still there, but the black and white, maybe it's just lets you concentrate more on the actual story than the art. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. But man, this book, some people may call me heartless, but like I never cry. And especially watching movies, reading books, anything, I never cry. This book almost got me there. I was like, you could feel it in your throat, and dang, this book touches on all those things. And what's really cool also is it hits on D&D. It uses a lot of kind of like D&D-ish monster fighting things. And man, it was so good. So great. The art was amazing. Intriguing story. And then just when you kind of figure out what's going on in the story, because it's very mysterious with it and you never really know what's going on, it hits you then. Super good book. I have an overview on all three of these books actually that I've talked about. So number two, right here, we have probably, I would say, my favorite character of all time. And if you've watched the channel for any amount of time, you know that I can't really go a single video without mentioning this character because I freaking love him. And I think the creator, Stan Sakai, is probably the best single creator in all of the comics industry, in my personal opinion. His art style is just next to none. I friggin' love his art style. When he does his watercolor paintings, just outstanding. But aside from his art and just the cool like anthropomorphic world that he's created over like 38 years now, he's had this long running. I have the entire thing over there in all hardcover format. It's like my crowning jewel of my collection. But he's kept the story going for like 38 years. And what's amazing about it is, yeah, you can read it all the way through chronologically and it is amazing. Or you can just nearly pick up any single issue or any trade paperback or book, and you're really not going to be lost because it's so like episodic, but it has these huge overarching themes and characters that come back in, and it's masterful work. And Daisho, the story on that, well, I suppose I should show the book too. So I have Usagi Yojimbo #1. This is the limited edition hardcover. If you're going for the hardcovers, I'm very sorry to say this book is just, you're going to be spending a lot of money on this book. I spent a lot of money on it, and it technically was damaged, which doesn't really have much, if any, damage on it. But I spent a lot of money on this book, and then I spent very little money to get the rest of the series. So it worked out to be cover price for everything, and I got it all in like 1 week. It was a sweet deal, and it was a miracle that it happened. So this is the limited signed edition of 900, which this is 82 of 900. And then they reprinted actually another 600 copies to make it 1,500 hardcover copies of Volume 1 to match the 1,500 of the rest of the series. Anyways, just to talk about how great of storytelling and the amount of work that goes into this. Stan wrote a story. It's one of my favorite. It's a Daisho. And the whole story is just about how the katanas, the swords, are actually made. And it's like two issues long, maybe 3. But it just goes in depth, and the art is just wonderful and supports it. And it just talks about all the work that goes into the swords. And that also comes in and helps you understand why he's so protective of his swords, and why they feel like their souls are tied to these weapons. But it's just like, man, the research and the historical knowledge that goes into this, yeah, it's all kind of that fantastical demons and monsters and things like that, but like based in feudal Japan and has very real kind of historical contexts brought in. Stan Sakai is a master artist and storyteller. If you have not read this, jump into the Fantagraphics double hardcover slipcase edition. That is where the whole thing starts. Fantagraphics box set. It's pretty easy to find, relatively easy to find. There's also trade paperback versions. But man, you could get that double slipcase set, and if you don't like it, you're out. It's not that expensive, but it is amazing. And if you love it, it only gets better. Cannot recommend Usagi Yojimbo by Stan Sakai enough. Absolutely fantastic story. Absolutely fantastic series, characters, and art. Love it. Anyways, okay. So now we are going to talk. I just talked that up. How can a book beat that? Well, this is influential. So number one, my most influential comic book that I have in my collection. And oh my gosh, this is how I began reading comics. Well, kind of got back pulled into it. My very first comic was like Spider-Man Trial of Peter Parker. I think it's from the Clone Saga or something like that. I need to figure it out. I had like 1, 3, and 4 out of the 4-part series of the Trial of Peter Parker, and I just reread those so much as a kid. But that's the only comics that I had ever gotten. And then I went to my library and I found a RoboCop comic, and my parents caught me with it, and it was a big ordeal. My parents got mad at the library for letting a 7-year-old kid check out pretty intense comics, more for adults. But anyways, I digress. So this is the comic that got me back into comics. And I became friends with a guy named Sam who worked at my local comic shop. And we were doing a podcast, my brothers, a couple friends, and I. We were doing a podcast long time ago. And we would talk about movies, TV, and video games. And we'd do a weekly thing. It was just a lot of fun. We'd get together over lunch breaks at work, and we'd record these podcasts for 45 to 60 minutes. A lot of fun. We did that for years. And at some point, we met this guy, Sam, and he worked at the comic shop. He's like, why don't you guys read comics? Comics are awesome. And we're like, yeah, sure. I mean, we could. So he came in and he started talking about comics. So we did TV, movie, video games, and comics. And he started giving us comics. Well, the first comics that he gave me to read was Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender. As a kid, all I knew was like capes and cowls. I'd seen that RoboCop comic a little bit, but I'd totally forgotten about that until a couple years ago when I saw someone post about RoboCop comics. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember that now. But this was the book, trade paperback version, I read, and I was like, wait, comics? This is how insane and crazy comics can be. And now, this is some pretty intense, got some, Marvel, Max type moments where it gets pretty insane and pretty violent, and deals with some issues in here that many comics don't dive into, especially in the capes and cowls genre, or the Marvel and DC capes and cowls genre. But it opened my eyes to what comics could really be for adults, and that not a lot. There's a huge world of comics just for adults, not for kids. And I was like, what? No way. So I read that series. I freaking loved it. And then I started jumping into single issues. And then after a long time, I got into collected editions rather than single issues, sold off all my singles. And I was so sad when I went to track down Uncanny X-Force. I'm like, I got to get the book that roped me back into comics and really, really for the first time brought me into the comics world. I got to go get that book. And it was so out of print at the time. It was insanely expensive, $300-$400 probably. And then Miracle of Miracles, and what always happens, someone goes out and spends that amount of money, and then it triggers a reprint. It seems like there's always got to be that sacrificial lamb of someone finally just breaking and paying obscene amounts of money for an out-of-print book, and then it gets reprinted. Don't do that, y'all. Wait for the reprints, because especially with Marvel and even DC, there are so many reprints, and Image is reprinting, Dark Horse even occasionally reprints. Like, don't blow a ton of money on after market pricing. Wait, because most of us have a huge backlog. Read your backlog and wait for that out of print book, that whale that you cannot seem to harpoon. That's what I did, and this book came back into print, and I was like, day one, need to have it. Love this book because it brought me into this entire world of comics. Cannot recommend that book enough. Love it. It is a super good story overall anyways, but I have that nostalgia for it because of what it did for me. It brought me into the comics world. So I'll show it again. Number 1, Uncanny XForce. Number 2, we got Usagi Yojimbo. It could be the Fantagraphics. It could be any of the books. I just grabbed volume 1. Number 3, we have I Kill Giants. If you want an emotional story, here you go. Number 4, Carbon and Silicon. Great story. Very philosophical. Really interesting. And Bablet's art is just amazing. Outstanding stuff. And number 5, some of the best horror, which isn't super horror and like gruesome or anything like that, but some of the like best suspense, thriller, horror out there. And I think probably my favorite work by Terry Moore, Rachel Rising. Really love that book. So that's those are my top 5 books that are the most influential in my collecting and comic kind of philosophy, theology, as it were. Really love them. So, you know, I haven't even really thought about who I would nominate next in this video. I'm kind of tempted to toss it over to Omni Nation, and let's see what he has going on. So, Omni Nation, I'll nominate you for your top 5 most influential comics. To you. All right, you know what, that's it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notification, do all those things, but the most important thing to do is comment. Let me know in the comments what your you could do your top 5, maybe I'll just say, you know, top 3, and if you're not feeling it, you can do your most influential comic of all time. I'm not saying the best, most well-written comic of all time. I'm saying to you as a comic reader, as a comic collector, what is your most influential comic? Top 5, top 3, top 1, just top overall. What is your top most influential comics to you as a reader? It doesn't have to be like, oh, this is the best story out there, but what affected you the most could be your life, could be in your reading habits, collecting habits, all of that. Let me know in the comments. I would love to find out what's influencing you all out there. All right, that's it. Take care. Stay cool.